Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to the latest Red Badger session. Today's topic continues our journey into the future of loyalty as we debate whether the future of loyalty is pointless or point-based. Now, it's clear from that in the realm of customer loyalty that it's no longer programmatic, it's no longer a sideshow, and so it's becoming core to the business strategy as established blue chips go head-to-head with digital native challengers to keep and win new customers. But the fundamental question, which we intend to address today, is whether point-based loyalty schemes will endure or evolve, or will point-based loyalty schemes as we know them today become extinct? My name is Gary Gould. I'm really excited to be your host this afternoon as we take a collective dive into the increasingly important part of the customer experience ocean. This event is brought to you by Red Badger, and it's part of our Badger Session series, which explores different themes and topics related to digital products. Red Badger is a digital product transformation consultancy, and we help some of the largest enterprises with large scale, high stakes, and high uncertainty challenges. We also have a practice area on loyalty, and everyone attending the session will get first access to a brand new publication on how to turn your loyalty scheme into a digital product. But more on that later. We also appreciate that you've set aside time this afternoon to join these sessions. And we also like to send our guests a little something from our friends over at Myers Fields to make the experience just that little bit more enjoyable. And there's a collectible cocktail stick as well, which you can use again and again for those dirty martinis, or as my wife prefers to use them for, expenses for receipts. They're very handy for that. We also look for feedback and suggestions on future events. And we'd like to explore different themes around digital product. And so we'll also have a quick survey that's, it takes about 40 seconds. Yes, we have timed it, which supports a great initiative. Red Badger will donate 5 free breakfasts to, for children that are disadvantaged and are at risk of hunger. And the link will pop up later for the survey. And you'll see a QR code, so just take a snap of that. It will take you straight to the survey. And the first question that will appear will be whether the future of loyalty is point-based or pointless. And we'll have that as a snap result at the end of the session. So now, in terms of our panelists, now, if loyalty was a movie, we have a box office cast this afternoon who have rich experience in domain expertise and will bring lots of fresh perspectives on this afternoon's topic. So joining me firstly is Dave Robinson. Dave has worked for Boots for over 25 years in various roles across commercial, strategy and development. His decades of experience, he's seen firsthand the changes in digital transformation and the impact of digital technology, and he's helped drive the evolution of the ubiquitous Advantage Card program. So welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, everyone.
He's joined by Gianfranco Cuzziol. He heads up CRM and personalization at Natura & Co., overseeing 4 iconic brands for the group, Aesop, Avon, Natura, and Body Shop. Welcome, Gianfranco.
Thank you, Gary. Hello, everybody.
Hi, and next up we have Anuradha D. Anu is the e-commerce product lead for nearly 450 Whitbread restaurants and is responsible for creating and implementing the restaurant's transformation strategy with a customer-first approach. So welcome, Anu.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, everyone.
Next, we have Robert Bates. He heads up Curry's decision sciences team, identifying advanced analytics, machine learning, and AI techniques that can drive change in long-term strategy and day-to-day trading. So welcome, Robert.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, everyone.
And to complete the stellar lineup, we have Candice Lott, who is a consultant. She's a former digital strategist and practitioner for some of the well-known, but best-known, actually, consumer-facing brands in the UK, including Nando's, Green King, and Compare the Market. Welcome, Candice.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Okay,
so welcome to all the speakers. So in terms of the agenda, let's dive in a minute. We're going to have the first part of 3 exploratory conversations and debate around loyalty program evolution, the impact of digital on loyalty, and then we'll bring it home with the future of loyalty programs. We'll then have the survey. I'll produce some of the snap results so far, and then that should bring us to the top of the hour ready to wrap up, and you can enjoy, all of you, the rest of your cocktails. Now, what we asked everyone when they registered was the current state. Do they have a loyalty program? Do you have a loyalty program today? And as you can see, that 30% have a point-based loyalty program, around 45% do have a loyalty program, but it's not points-based, and 25% have no loyalty program at all. So the jury is very much still out when it comes to points-based mechanisms, especially when you're driving specific loyalty objectives. But of course, to innovate in the future, you have to understand the past. And so we won't go too far back, but we will take a little bit of a time machine and look back 10, 15 years. I'm going to start with the first session on the evolution of loyalty programs. And the first question really is around how have loyalty schemes changed or evolved over the last 10 to 15 years? And I think, Dave, given your experience over the last 25, you're in a very good position to give us your perspective.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks. So yeah, the Advantage card, the Boots Advantage card, launched 25 years ago this year, actually. Although I hasten to add, I wasn't involved in it 25 years ago. About 10 years is my experience with it. And for me, there's probably three shifts that we saw with the Boots Advantage card scheme, which feel like they are market shifts. I think for me, the first one is data collection becoming so much more important than it was when a lot of these schemes were conceived. And of course, the original idea had been to gather more data about customers. But I think as data has become much more the fuel of a modern business or a modern retailer from a Boots perspective, the loyalty scheme plays a much bigger role now than it did before around collecting data. And I think we've seen some interesting evolutions in various schemes which use those loyalty programs to try and collect a bit more data than might be visible through transactions. So that'd be the first one for me. Data collection's got right to the top of the list. I think the second thing for me is there's been a shift from customers or consumers, I think, accepting a degree of, I don't really like the word friction, but I'll use it because I think we know what it means. The hurdles, the sort of, okay, you know what, I'm prepared to work a little bit for this, into it being, it has to be absolutely at my fingertips, with me at all times. I'm not putting any effort into participating in this. So that's been another big shift that certainly was seen at Boots. And the third one, probably the biggest one, I think, from a scheme mechanics perspective, is a very big shift away from reward being the focus, join the loyalty scheme and get a kickback, into it being the loyalty scheme becomes the way in which my version of this brand comes to me. It's the way in which my experience becomes more personalized. It's much more about customer experience, I think, now than it was 10 or 15 years ago, where it was really about an extra value of an extra layer of value on top of standard things like price and sales plan. So those are the three things I would say.
Okay.
And I think, Dave, a lot of that for me it's really been activated by the changes in the technology which we've seen over that time period. We've now got basically cloud servers. There's so many more ways we can actually start to interrogate that data. Mm-hmm. And those pathways to changing the customer experience have dramatically grown. 15 years ago, you couldn't personalize the websites to the extent we could now. We didn't have that capability of coming up with really personalized or very targeted and segmented offers. And I think the whole evolution of loyalty, the game ultimately has remained the same. It's about how do we use that value exchange to allow customers to entrust us with their data in a way we're going to use responsibly and reward them. But the level at which we can reward them, the degree of specificity, has increased basically exponentially over the years. And I think that's where it comes into changing that experience and working out how do you really get toward more of that personalized experience where you can.
And I think customers. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, do you think that change, just to unpack that a little bit, and we'll go on to the future of loyalty schemes in the third part, but do you think that change has been as a consequence of maybe a lack of imagination that's possible with turning this into sort of a digital, in the digital realm, rather than what loyalty once was, which was kind of a very simple collection process, either sort of manually in the old days to a sort of webbed, digital version of that? Do you think that needs to improve?
Personally, I don't think it's just that. I think it's about the toolkit growing, the ability to access that data. So from a retailer point of view, if you look at what Tesco's were doing basically back when Club Car launched what Boots were doing with Advantage. You were collecting all of that customer data, you were linking it to the transactions. It was just harder to find some of those patterns.
Right.
And it was harder to get those pathways to the implementation. So all of those things, actually, a lot of those have been eroded over the last 10 to 15 years, just by changes in the tech stack.
Right. Candice,
Yeah.
you were going to interject.
Well, I was just going to add to Dave's point around data becoming the number one thing. I completely agree, but I also think a huge evolution and change is in the mindset of the customer. They're now becoming more savvy to what their data is worth. And that's a big shift, because it's not just we give you X and you do Y. They're asking for more and more within that. So I think that's a massive evolution for me. So data, yes, as a foundational piece, but also the consumer really understanding what that's worth and therefore what they can command for that.
Yeah, and I was going to add that the customer is basically in the driving seat in terms of really understanding what value do they want out of the loyalty program. So I think brands need to really embrace that requirement, when they are talking about what is that loyalty program that you want to run and what's the value that customers will get out of it. So it's all around the personalization piece that we should be looking at, going forward. But however, there has been a big change in how it was run before and how it's progressing. But it's probably, it's for some brands they're doing better, some brands not so good. But ultimately, it's the customers driving their needs, and we as brands need to cater to that.
I think building on Rob's point as well, almost all of us have got a long ways to go in terms of actually using the data really well. I don't disagree, Rob, at all, that we're in a much better place now than we were. But there are still many web experiences, for example, that do nothing to reflect what we all know about the customer that we're serving. So the journey's definitely not over yet, that's for sure.
Well, I think one of the challenges there is how do you incentivize that customer to identify themselves to you at the point where you can make that decision? It's like years ago, I remember walking to the Boots stores and you had the Advantage points where you go in and there would be those preloaded offers you could download when you went into the shops. That was the attempt at almost bringing that digital world into the store. You could get those personalized offers. It's now been transformed into an app. So with my Waitrose, I can select from a list of offers before I go in store. It's that way of trying to create more of a personalized experience at a level where it's almost impossible to personalize for. You can't change the store range or the pricing when I walk into Waitrose. You can do the next best thing, which is give me some personalized offers, which I can use in that environment. I think it's merging the physical and digital worlds, where the value of that loyalty play, the data comes to play both for retailers, because we can fund those offers with suppliers, but also for the consumer of giving them something which they want and makes that value exchange worthwhile.
I think that's where it's evolved, right? Because I think you've all talked about, 20 years ago, it was a little bit about data, but now it's even more about data, because we know that collecting that data, first party data or zero party data, whatever we want to call it, is a premium now in terms of the way that we want to establish relationships with our customers. But I think the big thing that's changed for me is that loyalty isn't now just about a scheme or a program that sits there on its own. It's now embedded in the way the customer experiences the brand, right? So I think that it's about using that data and sometimes delivering an intangible benefit back to the customer without actually realizing it's part of a loyalty scheme, and sometimes it's about the smoothing the experience and delivering those. 20 years ago it was, you give me some money, customer to brand, and I'll give you some money back. Whereas now it's much more, how can I get some emotional investment from the customer by giving them back some intangible benefit that they're not going to get anywhere else. I remember 20 years ago HMV having a loyalty scheme where you got the points, but the ultimate thing was actually, if you got enough points, you could go into a raffle to win this exclusively signed guitar from Van Halen, right? So, and I think we're now taking that to the extreme, which is it is about that uniqueness of reward or recognition that we can give back to customers. And it's, the points and discounting is now a bit vanilla, a bit, everyone can do it to a certain extent. So it's what do you add on top of that to put the cherry on the top.
So we do have we do have a question in the panel, which is from Richard Linstead. He says, to what degree is this good practice, e-commerce, so in terms of that whole digital experience and wrapping this up in a more holistic way, versus loyalty or traditional loyalty as we as we've known it over the last 10, 15 years? Where do you see the separation between that digital experience and loyalty as a mechanism or as an objective?
I'm happy to have a bash at that.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
It's a great question, Richard. Thanks. I think you hit the nail on the head. Actually, I think what we're all saying really is what were potentially separate spheres, loyalty programs and really good customer experiences, are really coming together, with loyalty being one of the, not the only way, but one of the primary ways in which that data about the person that we're trying to serve comes into the business, so that you can then manipulate it using the tools that Rob mentioned, and then play it back to the customer. I do think the crossover, and I think to one of the points that was made, the challenge you've got is if you don't have a compelling reason for the customer to say this is me, which currently we use as a loyalty program, then the danger is you never actually get that data in order to be able to play it back to the customer. I think that's the challenge. There's a nuance that we would have experienced at Boots, and a lot of us on the call here would see the same, is when you have a physical presence as well as a digital presence, making sure that you've got data which crosses between those two is really important. And I think that's what makes it perhaps a little bit less just about a digital experience and more about however the customer touches the brand, they get what they want.
Do you think that sort of plays into some of the organizational challenges within organizations where there might be issues around internal ownership? They might have different, perspectives in terms of seeing still loyalty as a silo as opposed to a fundamental business strategy. Who'd like to take that?
I think from my perspective, a lot of what we talk about from a loyalty perspective is loyalty schemes shouldn't be seen as that sticking plaster to cover over other business challenges. In an ideal world, your brand position, your customer experience, your pricing promotion strategy should almost be enough to continue to get those customers to come back time and time again, to build that emotional loyalty, to build those connections. Now, the loyalty scheme, in my opinion, kind of sits on top of that. It allows the customers to identify, it gives a degree of personalization. But fundamentally, if you've got the basics right in the business, the loyalty scheme is the icing on top of the cake. It's not the thing which is going to fundamentally cover up a gap in if you've got bad customer experience. It's not going to cover something if your store format isn't right. But there's the day-to-day business, just get the basics right, and then the loyalty adds on to that. I think the real skill is working out where that fine line is. So where is it you come up with a strong offer for everybody, and where is it you need to differentiate on top for those most valued customers or those you want to grow the revenues from?
Yeah, I agree, because I think that if you look at the original survey that went out around who has a point-based scheme and who doesn't have one, I bet you anything that a proportion of those brands that are saying they don't have a points-based scheme, it's probably not an overt points-based scheme, but behind the scenes somewhere, they are collecting points and understanding the customers, right? And interacting them in some specific way that kind of reflects what that customer means to the business. In the same way that, a brand like Aesop that I worked on over the last couple of years, they don't have an overt loyalty scheme, but we recognize, we call it a recognition program. We recognize the customers, and we recognize tenure and their product loyalty and loyalty to a particular store, and we know that because we have the data, but we don't have an overt points make prizes mechanism. We use business savvy and using our data and using the experiences that we want to continue to deliver, and just differentiate across those various audiences by delivering a slightly more premium or slightly more enhanced experience to certain segments of the customer base, knowing that there is a particular behavior that we want to recognize and not so much change, but encourage, because we want to encourage particular behaviors.
Gianfranco, I think one of the really important points to bear in mind in this is that in a delivery or sort of mail order or online type, I can't believe I use mail order, but in that sort of business, the data's there anyway, and a loyalty scheme might be the cherry on the top. For a more traditional bricks and mortar type retailer, the vast majority of customers will go completely unknown unless you've got some, very specific means of gathering that data in the shop. And that becomes a bit of a challenge, I think, when you're trying to be either omnichannel or just entirely analog.
No, I get that. But I think there are ways of delivering value, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about that value exchange.
Yeah.
So there has to be a reason why you're going to give me as a starting point, your name and an email address, so that I can continue the conversation once you've left the store, which is where, a lot of Aesop customers don't shop online, they shop within that store. So actually, how do we start that conversation in store? Just slowly, because it is a relationship. We don't bombard them with 20 questions, because it's not a market research exercise. It's how do we kind of make sure that we collect enough information about you that we can carry on the conversation, but tell you why we want to collect that information. And it's because you've bought some product from us, and probably the first thing you want to be reminded when you leave our stores is, how do you use that product? So you've just spent 40 minutes in store having a sync demonstration about how to use the products. You've left it. And if you're like me, by the time you get home, you've forgotten which order the cleanser, toner, and hydrator should go on your face, right? So that educational piece, that value exchange is really valuable, and it starts that dialogue, I think.
So I think going back. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Candice. No, please.
No, you're fine. Going back to the question that was asked, I actually get quite passionate about this, because I think, there is a hygiene factor to what we call and deem loyalty programs, but effectively they are sales driving activity. I think true loyalty, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but we badge them as loyalty programs, but actually they're sales driving programs in the majority. And actually the minority of brands are getting it right in terms of actually converting the retention schemes into true loyalty programs. So I think it was a really good question that was asked. Sorry, I can't remember who asked it now. But I get really passionate about it, because loyalty is bandied around as a word, and actually the question was asked very well. Some of it is just good e-commerce and hygiene factors that equates to sales driving and retention activity, and absolutely plays a part, but loyalty is something very different in my view.
Yeah, I'd just like to add just one point to that. It's basically how can we build more of a connection with the brand first, and then if we have been able to satisfy the needs and the demands of the customer, then automatically, we will see that repeat business sort of coming through, and what we want to term as loyalty, and reward those customers in a specific way.
That's great. Thanks, Annie. Okay, right. There's one other question that I've got around Gen Z. We had a Red Badger session on this subject, and for those that haven't seen it, it's available on demand, so you can review that. But if I was to push all of you for just one sentence in terms of tuning loyalty schemes to Gen Z, and what area would you look at first to ensure that we're inspiring that new generation of buyers, what would it be? And I'll start with Dave.
From my own experience, digitization has become the most important thing. That I called three things out earlier on: the collection of the data, the shift from rewards to experience, and then the third thing for me, which is around this, just making it so darned easy that I haven't got to put any effort in.
To make it as frictionless as possible, basically.
Yeah, what certainly what Boots saw and successfully addressed actually was an opt-out from younger customers on the basis of, I can't be bothered. This is just too much effort. And the shift towards digitizing the Advantage card program, not just in terms of the card itself, by the way, but also the way in which the offers got delivered. They weren't sent for you to stick on the fridge; they were sent on your phone, and you've got them with you all the time. That was the most significant shift. I think the other thing I would say, we're all, I think, starting to see a degree of I want this to matter today in loyalty programs. And Gianfranco, you made the point around the building the relationship, and sometimes the value is just the table stakes. I think at Boots and I think at Tesco, what both have seen is a very successful shift towards quite vanilla type activity, a better price if you've got the loyalty program, that makes a difference today. It makes you regret not having a card or being a member of the scheme when you stood at the shelf and you see that it's going to cost you 50p more. So I think that we've seen that as well, and that was hitting hardest with the younger customers.
Yeah, so it's interesting around sort of adoption. I saw last night at Co-op buying a pint of milk well, it wasn't, it was 4 litres of milk. But there was a point of sale sign that said, if you download the app for the Co-op card, if you spend £10, you get £3 off. And it was like, well, that's a no-brainer. So I did that, but hit a few difficulties. But because I've got one that, you know, the plastic card. So they're even trying to, you know, incentivize adoption in some cases. Candice, your view on Gen Z, what's going to switch that generation on, do you think?
I love this question. I think two things from my perspective. The first is we need to ask them, because actually we sit here, none of us are Gen Z, and we can't start to, you know, understand what we think they want. So the first thing is to ask them. The second thing is, and I would have said the digitization point and making sure we tap into the channels that they're in. But I think, just not to repeat, I think content, you know, that's what they consume day in, day out. So how do you layer, you know, value exchange in terms of content versus just the points into this? And I think Gen Z are just in that sweet spot where they want to consume that content. They want to continue those conversations beyond the rational points. I know we've already touched on kind of trying to layer in that emotive element, but I think content is going to be absolutely king to do this. And there are some really great examples of that. So Nike, however, I know it's pronounced different ways by different people. They do a brilliant job of this, because you don't actually realize you're in a loyalty program. You just feel like you're part of a club. And you get great content because you want to run or because you want to train, and therefore you get access to different sales. So I just think asking them first and foremost, what do they want, you know, for the future, making sure that we're not kind of oldies in a room. Sorry, I'm not calling us all old, but you know, that we're well, exactly. They know what they want. We don't necessarily know that yet, and I know some brands absolutely do ask, and they do have data, so that's great. More of that. But I think content-led activity is going to be the key, and being in the channels that they're in.
That's great. We do have a question in the panel, but I'm going to save that question actually for the final part, because it talks about gamification, which I think is an interesting point that we can discuss in terms of loyalty futures. But Anu, what's your silver bullet for Gen Z to switch on that generation?
Yeah, I think it's a different generation, and I think most of the points have been covered. But I would say just to make sure that they can see the point of differentiation in our brands. So because they're very focused on, and they have a very specific idea of what good looks like. And hence, as a matter of fact, that level of differentiation and that emotive connection is what I will go back to, because they are in that generation where instant gratification is a key perspective for them. So how can we build that loyalty? So I think, you know, really understanding what are those sort of touch points that we need to cover to build that sort of loyalty from them. It would be, so it's not a straightforward like, oh, this is exactly what we need to do. It's about understanding, you know, what really, you know, touches them.
Good. Gianfranco?
I think Gen Z are powered by purpose and vision as well, right? So I think they probably won't come to you as a brand if they don't share some values with you. So, and as part of loyalty, I think that one of the big things around purpose and vision is a fundamental of loyalty is trust, right? So I think that whatever loyalty mechanic you have in place, whatever relationship you have with Gen Z, I think trust plays a key part in that. And trust is all about, you know, consistency, transparency. So I think if you get some of those fundamentals right, you know, however you have that relationship with Gen Z, it will hopefully reap rewards.
But
for both parties.
So it has to reflect the sort of corporate values, essentially. So if it doesn't reflect that, in terms
but without forcing it down their throats, right? Because I think that, you know, you don't want to be one of those brands that kind of just saying it for the sake of saying it. Right? So I think you have to live your purpose and vision, and it plays a part in any recognition loyalty program without it being the be all and end all. And
I think a part of that is about being genuine as a brand, knowing who you are and what you're not. So it's probably slightly different coming from the perspective of Coe's, where a lot of what we sell in terms of the MDA, the major domestic appliances, the TVs, the kettles, the toasters. They're not the most exciting things in order to have that, slightly controversial, but they're not the most exciting things to have that amazingly content-based relationship with. So for me, for Gen Z, it's about actually having that right genuine offer of being there to offer the help and advice. When people are moving into their first home, something they've never done before, it's about being there to be trusted, that we can get them the right products, that we can get them to them, we can install them, we can offer the services. It's about offering more of that complete package and meeting those needs. Now, it's not quite as shiny as like the Nike Run Club, but it's something which is fundamentally required. It's a bare necessity to kind of go in. You've got a house, you need a washing machine, you need a cooker, you need all of these things. So it's about being trusted and genuine, not being what we're not, doing exactly what we're meant to, which is offering great advice, helping people make the most of that technology. And that will start to bed in and get those more of those customers for life. It's the start of a journey with us, and we'll be there helping them every way, from moving in, starting a family, growing older, different tech needs. Our goal is we start at the start, and we'll take them on that journey and be there for them.
Great. Okay. All right. I think that concludes the first segment. I think we've dived very deep into the evolution, and we've touched on some points in terms of where loyalty schemes are going. But let's turn our attention to the impact of digital specifically. I know we talked about data in some depth, but and there was, as I say, going back to that question around sort of, is some of it just good e-commerce and making sure that buyer journey is as seamless as possible and as frictionless as possible, versus the notion of loyalty in terms of how that, you know, can be accelerated through digital loyalty, you know, through digital product, you know, and the impact of that in terms of actually driving those loyalty objectives. So we're seeing certainly at Red Badger that digital strategy is now sort of a core component of, or in sometimes the same as, business strategy. Do you think loyalty programs should be considered in exactly the same way? I'll go to Candice on that one.
You would come to me on the question that I'm still thinking about, but no, it's okay.
It's because you've got a number of brands to choose from, Candice.
Yeah, I do. That is very true. So yeah, I'm a big believer that loyalty as a thing has to stop sitting within a team and be part of, if not the driver behind, the business strategy. So for me, it's one and the same thing. It's not that there's a broader digital strategy and a loyalty strategy and a business strategy. It's that there is a customer experience strategy, of which, if you get that right, you drive loyalty. And you know, I am going to pull out probably another shiny example, but you know, Apple, you know, they don't discount, they don't have a loyalty program, but people are extremely loyal because loyalty is absolutely at the core of that brand. And I think where businesses will win or lose going forward is how strong that customer experience end-to-end is, to then build loyalty on top of. So I think that from a program perspective, obviously there's going to be a huge impact on loyalty from digital and personalization and all of those things. But your question around the strategy, I think it has to be the business strategy. I think the business strategy is the customer experience strategy.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that we need to stop thinking in terms of channels, because that's a very siloed approach of thinking. We need to think of the overall digital experience, and hence, you know, that digital first kind of approach is definitely the one that we should be considering. The customer experience, if the customer experience is poor, you know, we're just not going to have that customer visiting. I'm going to talk about it from our restaurants perspective. They're not going to come and eat in our restaurants. So hence, you know, building that loyalty is probably seems very far away. So it's that customer experience, both from a digital experience and also what they're getting in the restaurant, both will play a really important piece in terms of, you know, how we build that loyalty piece going forward.
But I think a part of that is that fundamental link between the business strategy and the customer strategy. Because I think for a lot of businesses, the most valuable part of that business is your underlying customer base. It's why you kind of have very high valuations for subscription models, because you can predict what revenues are going to be coming in the future. You've got a good idea of what that lifetime value is, and you can carefully manage the churn. So I think it's going back to, as Candice says, some of it's about the customer experience. It's about identifying the different value drivers you have within that customer base, either who are the most loyal ones, or if you're starting to look at activation campaigns, what are the attributes of customers you want to attract? Who will be those most loyal or more profitable in the future? And for me, it's building out not just a loyalty, not kind of a loyalty strategy, but a customer strategy, where you then have loyalty as a potential loyalty strategy on top as a way of identifying which customers to retain. Work out who you want to move, who are those customers who could become more valuable, and you can develop them, and focusing the bulk of the interactions on those groups. That allows you to be more focused on some of that investment. So I can see the question from Charlie about how do loyalty programs create enough value to create and retain the brand loyals. If you understand who those people are, you can actually apply different type of economics to those to some of those investments you're making, because you're not focusing on increased spend in year. You're focusing on increasing their retention. You've worked out who the customers are at risk, and you can take the actions to mitigate that. So I think you start off with the business strategy, which goes into the customer, and then it's the experience and loyalty channels which allow you to retain them.
There's also the customers that aren't so valuable. I mean, the cost of managing these schemes and the impact on margin can be significant. So, I mean, Gianfranco, do you across the 4 brands that you have responsibility for, do you see changes between, say, a typical Avon customer versus, any other brand that sort of maybe have sort of different sort of characteristics going on?
Yeah, and it's a challenge for some of our brands. I mean, I think just to pick up on a couple of points that everyone else talked about. I think that it's not. I don't think it is digital first. It is customer first, right? And it's just that digital is an enabler to deliver those different experiences that we want to deliver to the right customer audience in the right way, and change and recognize some of those behaviors. But for us, it is very dependent on the brand, and also Aesop. Yes, of course, digital is important in Aesop, but so is that very physical, tactile experience that you have in a store when the consultant is holding your hand and showing you how to apply one of our hydrators, and then at the other end of the scale with the likes of Avon and Natura in Latin America, where the business model is different because we don't normally serve direct to the consumer. We go through a rep or a consultant. Yeah. So actually, even within the rep and consultant world, there is a how do we generate loyalty within that base, because they're all different. You'll have super consultants at one end who might earn thousands of pounds in commission selling to customers, and at the other end of the scale, you have consultants that might sell to their sister and mother-in-law, and that's it. So it's actually how do we use digital to deliver an experience to different reps and consultants based on those particular needs that they have. Yeah. So some they'll want to be influencers within a base, and we should provide them with the tools to do that. Everyone else, it's just, I just want the product to arrive on time when I ask for it at the price that I want. So I think that it's about making sure that we understand the customer, whoever that customer might be, and then talk about how digital plays a part in that, because we will talk about we want to be more digital, but why? What is the knock-on effect of digitizing something, whether it be at the back end or the front end, and then that allows you to focus in terms of where you put your resources, which customers you're going to tackle first. So I think that it's less about that digital first. It's more about understanding the customer and your business model.
Okay, Dave, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, sure. There's a couple of things I'd say. I couldn't agree more with Gianfranco on that point. It drives me slightly potty when we talk about omnichannel and then we talk about digital experience and digital first. Some customers, my mum ain't digital first. She's still a very valuable customer. We have to think about what's that customer after and how do we give it to them. But the thing, I just wanted to come back to your question, Gary, around the ball and chain that you might be dragging around behind you with a loyalty program. What's the cost of running these things? And I'd just like to suggest that sometimes we might want to flip that on its head a bit, actually, because one way of thinking about a loyalty scheme is to say, I'm going to use this as a means to avoid giving away stuff I don't need to give away. For example, if your strategy was very, very low price and you followed that, we don't do loyalty, we just take price off the shelf. There'll be lots of customers who don't need that cheaper price and they'll still continue to shop with you. And that in its own right is a very, very, that's a ball and chain as well. That's an albatross around your neck. And if you can think about a loyalty program as saying, I'm going to use this to limit as much auto reward as possible. And actually, I'm going to give the customers who need the most incentive the best incentives, rather than give my best customers the best incentives. You can actually make the economics work very much in your favor. It's just we don't often talk about loyalty in that way. Maybe it feels a little bit, to talk about taking things away from customers, but done well, really, it's just it's a different way of balancing the seesaw.
Good. Just picking up on the point, Gianfranco, about sort of customer first. There's a lot of vendors out there that are providing, sort of almost off-the-shelf SaaS-based, points-based programs that you can tap into. Do you think that enough consideration is actually being given to the sort of technology platforms? I know you're saying it's customer first, but do you think there is a cross-functional aspect that needs to be considered if, say, the marketing department decides to buy into a points-based scheme, but actually it creates issues like vendor locking, for example? Are those discussions you're having? Because I'd be interested to know.
Well, so I think that I think the biggest mistake that some brands make is they don't realize that even if you buy an off-the-shelf package, you have to integrate it with a whole bunch of back-end systems to get this to work, right? It's not something that just sits there. It's like buying a CRM system. You don't just buy it. I sometimes call it, the vendors, I call it cruel optimism, where they kind of go, well, sell you something and it'll solve all your problems. Whereas in reality, you have to think about the fact that it needs to plug into your e-commerce system. It needs to plug in to supply chain. It needs to plug into your POS system. It needs to plug into CRM. So I think that's the thing that people should really think about when they look at these off-the-shelf packages, because there are numerous ones in the marketplace. But again, it's about understanding customer. It's understanding the behaviors you want to change or recognize within your customer base. Then you can start thinking about, okay, so what is the technology that I need to deliver that? Rather than going, there's a lovely bit of technology. How can I take some of this gamification, first-party data collection, and apply it to my customer base? I think it needs to be the other way around.
And
I think that then links into a lot of the back-of-house stuff and the things people forget about. If you've got a loyalty platform, great. But you've got to go around the commercial teams and get them to find the right offers. You've got to change the commercial behaviors to go, this offer is for this segment. And you have to integrate that within the business. So that first bit, that looks really nice and easy. Great, I know how loyal the customer is, I know what the points are. But what do I actually do next? Where am I going to differentiate it within the business? That's where the hard work starts.
Yeah.
Rob, you've got to put, sorry.
No, so I was just going to say that it's all around the data, customers coming and dining with us. What do we understand from that data? Because if the data is sitting on a separate system and, they're not talking to each other, that whole piece about really, delving into the data to understand the behavior and then talking about that behavior with various other teams to come up with really valuable offers, which are more meaningful to that customer. I think it's all of those things need to tie together, and that's where your sort of customer first technology enablers and all of those kinds of things come in.
Right. Well, I think we're all in agreement about the customer first mindset, which is great. And we've got some comments as well in the chat, which is agreeing with that perspective as well. So let's move, because we're sort of we're 45 minutes into this debate. Let's go to the last section, which is the future of loyalty programs. And there was a question earlier from Nindi that was talking about gamification and loyalty and relevance to Gen Z. Let's talk about that first, and then I've got a couple of other questions, which is what are the sort of advantages and disadvantages of point-based schemes, which will actually help with the big poll later. But let's tackle the issue of gamification and how that can plug in. Who'd like to take that first? I'm seeing a nod from Candice again, so I'll take that as Candice. Would you like to take that?
Sure. Sure, I'm happy to have a view to answer the gamification element specifically. So gamification is always an interesting one because obviously it's become a buzzword, and we've probably all heard that from the board, you know, saying, can you add some gamification into the loyalty program? I think done well, it doesn't feel like gamification. And so I think it does have a place, but really it is just behavioral activity, right? Like we badge it as gamification, but it's either collecting or something. We're driving behaviors. So I think it does have a role as long as it's not gamification for gamification's sake. And I see that far too often, actually, where people want to overcomplicate a mechanic because they want it to be fun, or they want it to be interesting, or they want it to, you know, have talkability, where actually then customers just get very confused. I think the simplicity is important. Again, if I talk back to the Nike example, there is gamification in that without you even realizing. You know, you can win badges, you can win awards, etc., etc. So, you know, you kind of challenge yourself for that reason, and there's a real reason for gamification in that, because actually it drives you to become the best athlete that you can be. But yeah, I actually get quite frustrated when businesses apply gamification just for the sake of it. So that's my view. I do think there is relevance, and it is still relevant as a thing, as long as it's thought through, and as I say, not just for the sake of it.
But for me, as someone who's like, as a user of loyalty schemes, I think a large part of loyalty in some ways is that gamification, but more on some of those reward sides. It's about you finding those arbitrage opportunities and those hidden values, the way you can always use your points to the best value. And that for me has always been a key component of that. I remember when I was in consulting in the early 2000s, working in America, and virtually every consultant there talked about their star point moment. All the hotel nights, how are they going to maximize the value? How are they going to get that amazing reward, that dream trip they couldn't otherwise do? And that brought to life some of those loyalty schemes. It made them aspirational. It made people change their behavior, staying at the Starwood instead of the Holiday Inn. And I think there's a fundamental part of loyalty, which is about that arbitrage. It's getting the offers, it's getting the extra value. It's, as a customer, it's finding ways to almost win in the system. I've got countless examples I won't bore you with about Boots, Dave, but there's so many opportunities where that brings the customers to life. And as a retailer, you've got to think about how do you provide those examples, because otherwise, if it's just pence in the pound, it does get a bit boring.
And Richard's made a point in the chat, which Richard, I hate to break to you, but fairies aren't a thing, about losing their wings. But there is a gamification. I think it's a stinker of a word, and we had experience of it at Boots, where you use it and half the audience just turn off because they go, "Here we go. It's the marketing guys have arrived and all the technologists have arrived, and I'm just going to switch off." But I think it is about just making it mildly interesting, because there's a fine line, isn't it, between making this stuff so frictionless that it's easy to use and so dull that you just can't be bothered. And for me, gamification is just about finding excuses for customers to pick the phone up, open the app, have a quick look. That's what we're trying to do. I think we're not playing games as such, you know.
So Franco has made a point around, do point schemes, you know, cheapen the brand, and I guess gamification, you know, is another sort of area. And let's not sort of delve too much further into gamification per se, but it's an interesting point around brand erosion, and if loyalty schemes aren't sort of configured properly, not just point-based schemes, but just in general, does that create brand damage? Is it the potential to create brand damage? Dave, or Gianfranco, go.
But I think, you know, it depends on the brand, right? I think that we have this thing that, you know, all loyalty schemes don't look the same, and if they did, it'd be a really boring world, and all the customers would look the same as well. So I think that it's horses for courses, and I think that for some brands in some markets, points make complete sense, right, and won't damage the brand, and whether because you use points and there's a bit of a gamification, you know, element to that, but customers it's not overtly gamification, but it's there because you want to get to the next tier or get the next reward. I think it makes perfect sense. I think that for some brands, it would absolutely ruin the brand, in the same way that a very overt loyalty program for some brands would not work. And so, perhaps for more of the premium brands, something that is much more, and again, some people hate this term, but a bit more surprise and delight, but somehow recognizes every now and again that you get something because of the way that your relationship with the brand. I used to be a biggish Nespresso drinker. And 5 years ago, before there was a formal kind of membership program or loyalty program within recognition program within Nespresso, I'd be delighted every now and again because I'd get a free box of chocolates or a free box of biscuits or a new coffee to try, either arrived through the post or when it went into a store. As soon as I became an ambassador, right, I'm in their ambassador level, my emails are a different color and I'm called an ambassador, but I've lost those perks, right? So again, it's making sure that you get the right balance. And sometimes, there's now an overt points element, but I seem to have lost that engagement with the brand that I loved before there was that overt points make prizes kind of move with them. I still drink Nespresso, but
but now you feel it's more of a transaction.
Yeah, possibly, yes, yeah.
Okay, so it's cheapened that experience. Annie, what's your perspective?
I think my perspective on this is obviously, if we can understand the data about our customers, really understand our customers and what works for them, just because I think it's never a one size fits all approach. So it's about understanding if we would like to incorporate some gamification within what we are doing, that's great, as long as it works for the customer. So I think, again, going back, circling around that point, about customer first, and then using technology as to how that can be done. But at the end of the day, it's all about who your customers are, what do they really want, how do you want to reward them? I think those are some of the key questions that we need to answer.
Very good. Okay, let's try and bring this home now in terms of key advantages and disadvantages of points from, all of you have been exposed to it both professionally and obviously as consumers. Let's talk about advantages first, or maybe each of you can give me an advantage and a disadvantage from your perspective. Let's do it that way round. Dave, Boots Advantage card. What's been the key advantage as an advantage card, and what's been the key disadvantage, do you think, over the years?
See what you've done there, Gary. See what you've done there. So in terms of points-based schemes, the pluses and the minuses, I would say the plus is you can be very clear with the customer of the rules of the game. I think the disadvantage is if you're not careful, you end up dragging a ball and chain around with you, cost-wise.
Thank you. Robert?
I'd agree with Dave on, and the advantage is it's a nice, highly visible currency. It's easy to kind of give rewards where customers are going to change their behavior. It's easy to get those boosts. I think the hardest part, on the biggest disadvantage with points-based schemes, is what do you do when you've burnt the points? What do you do when that customer's back to square square one? And this is now where I think the hotels and airlines have got it down to a T. You just redeemed everything, but you still BA Gold, you still get the first class check-in, you still get to use the lounge, you still get the softer side. So it's making sure that once you've burnt the points, there's some kind of soft landing to give you the reason to keep coming back to that brand. And it stops just being transactional if I want to earn something.
Okay. Gianfranco?
So I'd say in terms of an advantage, picking up on what was said just then, I think that because it's obvious and the customers understand the rule. I think that as an acquisition mechanic, it kind of works really well there because customers kind of know what they're buying into. So that from that perspective, I think that's certainly an advantage. I think a disadvantage is when it's not done effectively and the reward isn't necessarily linked to the points that you're collecting. Yeah. So I was. Again, I'll name drop a brand that sometimes doesn't do it didn't do it that well. But Marks and Spencer's, I'd collect my points, and and I'd be invited to, I don't know, get free tickets to the Royal Flower Show. You know what? That doesn't really cut the mustard for me. Whereas some brands, they get it right. I think that Jean-Louis. No, actually, there's a I forgot the name of the brand now, but there's Joe Malone did some nice things with my wife where the reward is very linked to the products that you're buying in store. So I think that at that scale, then it works. But if you don't link reward to points in a very tangible way, then I think it falls over.
And Joe Malone, I think, have been very that they like surprising, don't they? They sort of send packages of sort of 30 mil of perfume and stuff. So there's definitely a delight aspect.
I think my wife enjoyed that she got invited for a shoulder massage.
Oh,
and she hates direct marketing, but she loved that. I tried to explain to her that's what it was, but she wouldn't have it, you see.
My wife shares your frustration with the Sparks card, by the way, although she would have loved the invite to the was it a Chelsea Flower Show or something? But
yeah, I might still have it in my inbox. I can forward it.
That's great. Yeah, she'll happily take that reward. So there you go. We add that to the data. Right. Who have we got? Candice. Yes, let's get your perspective on it.
I love Joe Malone, by the way. They do a brilliant job. So, but in terms of advantages of a points program, they're definitely sales driving. There's no doubt. You know, some brands use them too much in a tactical way, but they can drive sales. And they're a really good baseline, I think, to start to get to know our customer. So I think they're the advantages in my mind. In terms of the disadvantages, they are very rational. You know, people don't tend to feel very connected to them because lots of them are very samey. So, you know, Tesco's are doing some great things at the moment in terms of, you know, change the price on the spot. But how long before other brands start doing that? And so it's just the same, and the price is just a race to the bottom. So I think that's a disadvantage. And then my other disadvantage is they definitely cannibalize sales in a lot of instances. Yes, I think as a, you know, overall piece, they absolutely drive value, or we wouldn't do them, but they are cannibalizing sales for some people. And I can't remember who said it, but, you know, ensuring that we reward customers in the right way rather than just keep giving discounts, I think is going to be a really interesting future approach, rather than just continuing to cannibalize sales and effectively be a race to the bottom from a price perspective.
Interesting. Anna?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I mean, points are simple, people understand it, you know, and so many brands are doing a points-based system. So it's quite simple, people get the drill. But with regards to the disadvantages, I think the biggest, how much are we actually making customers work hard to gain the points and then get the rewards? I think there has to be that perceived value that customers see, that yes, okay, fine, if I did this, then this is how many points I'm going to earn and how easy it is to spend it. So I think that the main purpose of any loyalty program would be how many more times can we get those customers back into, you know, whichever, to either to buy a product or to visit the restaurants, whatever that might be. And if they can't, you know, see the value of getting or joining the loyalty program, then I don't think either a points-based system where the customer doesn't see that perceived value is any good.
Very good. We've got a couple of questions. I know we're reaching the sort of the top of the hour. I know that we can sort of go over a little bit, but there was an interesting question from Eleanor, which talked about premium brands retaining loyalty when their spend points volume might be slow for a while. So this is kind of moment in time where you're trying to sort of create brand advocates. Who'd like to take that or answer that question? I won't go around the whole panel, but who'd like to address that, or has anyone been? I
think this is one where the power of the customer data comes into play, really.
Yeah.
Because if you started to identify who were those more loyal customers, where is that spend frequency starting to drop? I think that's where you have to drop in a little bit less on the point side, but more, how do you go back with those surprise and delight? How do you go back with rekindling some of those brand experiences? I mean, if you're kind of in a premium retailer, it might be inviting people back into the stores. It might be just having events. There's a whole set of things you can do which aren't massive cost. Don't actually put that much obligation on the customer, but can make them feel welcome back into that fold. And you retain that emotional loyalty which you're looking to developing, and getting away from it purely transactional.
Yeah, they still feel part, and they have that sort of brand attachment, but it isn't costing you, to send a free gift or whatever. It's more about the experience. Okay,
and trying to avoid it being based on them having to buy more as well, because if they're starting to go through that time of it's tougher for cost of living, you've got to come up with the experiences which aren't going to cost the earth to retain that loyalty.
I think, or Gary, it can be, it can just be in the moment type saving. So I mentioned earlier on about club card pricing with Tesco and advantage pricing at Boots, very similar sort of idea. And I think, Eleanor, for me, that would be the thing. It's not either or. So it's very tempting, I think, to go, well, do you need point schemes or not point schemes? Actually, you can have a blend of both. I think the problem with points in this space is, if I've got to stick with you forever, I can't be bothered, and therefore I'm not in at all. I'm not even going to start the journey if I'm not going to be prepared to complete it. You can find ways of making it count today, and that's rarely going to be based upon points, I think. But that doesn't mean that you have to torch points as a concept and go down a different route. And I think the problem with serendipity, lovely as it is that sometimes the customer doesn't quite know how the value equation works out, because they may or may not ever get that experience, and that so it's a trickier sell, actually. Join the scheme and you might get something, but I can't promise that you will, and I'm not going to tell you whether you will or not, and how you're going to get it isn't terribly compelling.
No, and it's not particularly transparent either, which is another sort of going back to the Gen Z point. That's what they're looking for. So, okay, well, I'm going to draw this to a close. We've got lots of other some other questions in there, but what we'll do is we'll take those questions and we'll get those answered directly to those that have answered them. There's some interesting questions, but I think actually one could even be a topic moving forward around B2B programs. Actually, that's a whole topic in itself, I think. Going to be able to answer that in 5 minutes, that's for sure. So in terms of the survey that I mentioned earlier, if you just want to get out your mobile phones, take a snap of this, it will take you straight to the survey. Basically, for every survey response, we'll donate 5 breakfasts to Magic Breakfast, and it literally takes 40 seconds to complete. And the first question is whether the future of loyalty is point-based or pointless. So we're going to have a snap result in a minute. So please go ahead and complete, and I'll share the initial results in a few minutes. And we'll share the final result on Friday, so look out for the email containing the final result for that. And in that email as well, you'll see a link, and this is completely complimentary. We've got a new guide which can actually help you turn your loyalty program into a strategic value stream. It's a step-by-step guide. It's been written by one of our MDs, Joel Williams, who's the practice lead for loyalty as well. And so yeah, look out for that link. It's a really good sort of step-by-step guide in terms of turning your loyalty program, or if you're thinking about having a loyalty program, how you can approach that. So we're going to sort of wrap up, and this is very experimental. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a live totalizer. It's like Blue Peter for those that are old enough, where you have the sort of the totalizer. And we're going to see how many people have actually responded already. Hopefully we can see that increase. So, well, already we're nearly at 50 breakfasts donated. So thank you for that. And we're going to keep refreshing, I think, as we go. So if you just want to take a look, it also provides feedback. The survey provides feedback for our speakers as well. Any ideas that you've got around future Badger session events as well. I think we're at nearly 150. So 50%, so half of you have responded already, which is great. And I think what I'm going to do is we've probably got enough, I think, to let's see if we can get it to 75%. And then what I'll do is I'll flip it to the snap survey. We'll get the snap survey results, and then we'll have the final result at the end. Let's go. Wow. Thank you very much. That's great. I wasn't quite expecting that so soon, but we now have a good snap poll next. So let's go to that. So based on the live survey responses that have come in, wow, it's a tie. It's an exact tie. That's incredible. So
that's a fix, Gary. That's a fix.
I honestly have not, sort of gamed this at all. Right? There's no gamification here. Oh, for pointless. That pointless is just. Oh, there you go. It's just edging it a little bit. How does that sit with the panel? What you kind of expected, do you think, as a consequence of this conversation today?
I would say so. I think it's a really accurate reflection of the fact that it's a balance. It is a balance, and that's what numbers say.
That's great. Good stuff. Okay, well, that we can leave it there. I think pointless just about edges it. So it is about those experiences. My thanks to the speakers and to everyone behind the scenes that's made the event happen. If you haven't, it looks like there's 2 of you that haven't completed the survey. So for the 2 that haven't, if you could, that'd be great. If you've enjoyed the session, love to hear your thoughts and feedback as well, even if you just want to drop us a line at Red Badger. And that leaves me to wish you all a happy evening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Gary.
Thank you.
That's it.